Thanks, Steve. And I think it's not too early to say Happy Christmas to everybody. I'm going to try and get away with it a week to go. And what I was been thinking recently is that Christmas is actually quite a divisive time. Okay, so I thought what we do to start is see how divisive it is within this room. So don't panic. It's not going to be anything too difficult. But for example, tinsel, okay? Tinsel, festive or tacky? Tinsel, that's the question. I think we might have a vote on this, actually. There's a great example of it being festive up on the screen behind us. So can we have hands up for festive? Tinsel, festive. Look at that. That's outstanding. That's much better than I thought. What about tacky? Tacky. There we go. Look, I think the tinsel needs to go on our tree. That's with a majority in the room. What about another one? The box of celebrations, one of Christmas's most divisive things. They've recently had, I think it's a bit of a PR stunt to be honest, but limited editions celebrations tubs with no bounties in. So bounties in a celebrations tub or not? Let's go for the bounties first. Look at that, that's quite surprising as well. And without the bounties. Okay, it's 50-50 split, this is going well. What about this one? Maybe not quite so divisive. Christmas music in November. Christmas music in November. Hands up for yes. Christmas music in November. Just a small smattering. Yeah, I thought this might be where it goes. And in December only. Christmas music in December only. Vast majority. And the final, and of course the most classic divisive Christmas item of all, the Brussels sprout. For the Brussels sprout, let's go first. Some people putting up 2 hands, which I think is cheating. Against the Brussels sprouts. The Brussels sprout wins. There you go. Christmas is a divisive time for all of those reasons. And I say that in jest, and it's harmless fun, isn't it? But for you, maybe it feels divisive in other ways. You know, Christmas can be divisive in more serious ways because some of us just love it. Absolutely love it. It's the best thing ever. And for others, it can feel hard and exhausting and sad. And perhaps even those of us who absolutely love it, one of the reasons we do love it is that it kind of whips us away from the divisive world around us, isn't there? There's all sorts of ways in which our world is divided with different opinions and different policies, culture wars, real wars, all sorts of ways around us. And perhaps that's why we buy in so heartily. Perhaps that you're here tonight because you love the kind of magic of Christmas, the way it wraps us up in familiar songs and familiar stories and twinkly lights and even tinsel, and helps us to go, yes, unite around this, enjoy it together, and for just a few short weeks, in the midst of December, the darkest days, we push the division to one side. And yet, I wonder if you noticed with that last reading that Steve read for us, that actually the first Christmas was pretty divisive in itself. Did you see those 2 really strong and distinct reactions? We had Herod, King Herod, and all Jerusalem around him who were disturbed when they heard the news of the birth of this baby Jesus. And yet on the other hand, we had the Magi, these guys who've come from the east. They traveled out of their country and they turn out to be overjoyed and worshipping this king. And I hope as we spend a few minutes in this story, what we'll see is that actually the realism of the Christmas story and those 2 distinct reactions, as we look at them, the realism of the Christmas story is something that actually helps us to live in amongst the division of this world and to live with joy and peace in our hearts because of it. And I say realism because it is a real story. It's something that really happened. You see, verse number 1, that first line, if you've got it in front of you, is page 966 if you want to, says this: after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod. And it's a story with real places and real people and real times. You know, we know when King Herod lived. We know when he died. We know that stuff. And Matthew writes this down, places this story and these extreme reactions right at the heart of a moment in history. And he says, this happened. There's realism here. So what happened? Well, we have these figures, the Magi from the east. They're quite mysterious guys, and they're often talked about as kings or wise men, and there's probably a bit of all of that wrapped up in who they are. They certainly seem to be kind of influential, maybe scholarly astrologers, people seem to think. And they've come into Jerusalem, and they've come from the east, from out of town, and as they come in, there's something distinctive about them, so much so that they're noticed, and people pay attention. And as they come in, they're looking for the one who has been born the King of the Jews. That's the phrase they use. They see this star which in some way captures them, that they think this is the star that points to this figure, the one who has been born the King of the Jews. And I think that's quite a funny phrase, isn't it? If you think when the sort of the latest heir to the throne, who's realistically in line, was born, Prince George, this is what the Daily Telegraph headline said: "The baby boy destined to become King George VII." The baby boy destined to become King George VII. And yet the Magi say, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? As in, he's not destined to become the King of the Jews. There's this guy who's been born, and he's been born as the king. He already has the authority. That's who he is, tiny baby. He is the King of the Jews. And because of that authority, they seek out to worship him. There's something about him that captures their imagination. Now, on my way into town today, I went past a load of billboards, and one was for that most festive of restaurants, McDonald's. And on there, they were advertising the big tasty as like the taste of Christmas. And to me, it's a very festive thing, going to McDonald's. Maybe it's because as a child, we used to go up to London with my family, and either on the way in or on the way back, we'd always have a McDonald's together. So for me, I'm all in with their advertising Christmas. And of course, McDonald's, have you ever seen the film The Founder? Their big selling point has always been the speed of what they deliver. But their competitor, Burger King, then had to come in and think of something different. And so their big thing, not speed, but customization. And for years they had the slogan, "Have it your way." That's the Burger King slogan. And it's a good one, because actually it taps into a lot of what we want, isn't it? We want to have things our way. We want to be at the center. We want our life to be about us and kind of what suits us best. And they've actually updated it recently to, I think, an even better slogan, which is "You rule." That's the current Burger King slogan. You rule. And of course, they're very clever. And I didn't get it at first, but reading up on about, of course, what do kings do? They rule. Burger King, you rule. You get it? There's much more depth to it than you think initially. But it's a great slogan because it's the message and philosophy of our age, isn't it? You rule. Be the main character of your story, of your own story. You do you. Seize your control of your life and don't let anyone else get in the way. And it seems to make so much sense, to be such a good thing. Because actually we all kind of go for it and grab hold of our lives, and you rule, I rule, then actually we're all doing what's best for us. Doesn't that sound like good news? And this you rule mindset, I rule mindset, is exactly the mindset of King Herod here. Now, Herod, he effectively was the king of the Jews, literally the king over the area of Judea where the Jewish people lived. And did you notice how he responds to hearing about the Magi coming into town and going, "Where is the one who was born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him." Verse 3, if you've got it in front of you. When King Herod heard this, he was distressed, and all Jerusalem with him. So I've read that wrong. He was disturbed. He was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. He was probably distressed as well. And we see something, I think, of King Herod's character here. Because here he is, the king of the Jews, and these guys come in. He's got no idea who they are, but they're going, "Where's this guy who's been born king of the Jews?" And Herod's ears are twitching. He's going, "Been born another king, but I rule. This is my town. I'm in charge here." We see something of his character, and I tell you, when we read a few of the other sources about Herod, he's not the sort of guy you want to be disturbed, because he was violent and he was ruthless, and he was obsessed with maintaining his power, his own authority. And maybe that's why all Jerusalem was disturbed with him. You know, you don't want your King Herod getting disturbed and wound up here. You do not want that. Well, what does Herod do? Verse 4, this happens. He calls together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, and he asks them where the Messiah was to be born. He gets together all the kind of people with religious know-how, and he gets them together and says, where is the Messiah meant to be born? And the Messiah is this figure that's come up all the time in the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament of the Bible. And it's this great promised king who's going to come in and redeem the people. He's going to do something for them. He's going to free them. And the Jewish people would have, in one sense, been waiting for the promised Messiah, the King, a bit like how children wait for Christmas. And they're going, is he coming yet? Is he coming yet? Is he coming yet? But it's been a really long time and he hadn't come. But there's that sense of anticipation there. The promised Messiah is the one we want to come. And yet Herod here is asking about the Messiah, not because he's waiting for him to come, to bring the peace and redemption that's promised. But think of him not like a child waiting for Father Christmas, but more like a politician looking to shoot down the rebellion. What's the detail? Give me the intel. I want to know about him. And so he wants this information. He calls them together and they say to him, using the words of a prophet written years and years before, well, he's going to be born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem's the place. And Herod is not taking any chances here. He wants to know exactly about this guy who's been born King of the Jews. And so he calls together, gets the Magi to come to him. And verse 7 and 8, he says this. Well, he called them secretly, it says, in verse 7 and 8, and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. When was the moment this king was born? And then he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I may go and worship him. Of course, that's not what he's about here. He doesn't actually want to go and worship the child, but he wants rid of him. He wants to get all the information he can. He wants to bring them in to him. He wants to know exactly where that child is. And when they don't come back, and the bit that you read on a bit further from what Steve read earlier, you get even greater sense of Herod's character, because he actually, with the Magi going away from not coming back to him, he orders the killing of everyone under the age of 2, all baby boys under the age of 2, just to make sure. I rule. It's a terrible and extreme reaction. What's behind it? What's behind Herod here? So here's the thing. As you live out, I rule, that mindset, it leads us to want to attempt to be in control, to have things our way, to control things around us, our circumstances, because we're desperate to preserve the sense of worth and importance and value and meaning in our lives that we long for. That's what an I rule mindset leads to. And when something happens that seems out of our control, it leads to fear. It leads to fear that we can't hold on. Here's Herod here, a terrible and extreme example of it. But there's fear. There's another king that people may worship. And no doubt we wouldn't go to the lengths that Herod went to kind of maintain our own sense of having freedom and satisfaction, the things that this I rule mindset promise. But can you relate to what Herod's doing here? See, we're told that a satisfying and freeing life is about putting yourself at the center, about seizing control, not letting anyone else hold you back. But does it actually work? Does that actually work? How do you find it? Don't you find that it's not actually freeing, but it's exhausting? As we load everything up on ourselves, it's all about me. I've got to do it my way. I've got to prove myself, have a sense of value. It's exhausting. Don't we find that it's not actually even satisfying, but instead it's never enough? It never seems that our life is quite as good as the life someone else has as we look out the window at them, as we look at their social media feed. Their photos always look like they're having more fun, or they're classier, or more successful, or just more beautiful than us. And even when it does feel good, do you ever find yourself kind of looking over the shoulder, just trying to make sure things can continue as they are, looking out for the threats, just like King Herod was here? The I rule life, does it really work? Does it really deliver? But you see, we see from the Bible as well that the I rule life isn't just something that doesn't deliver, that it doesn't work in the way that the world around us says it does, but it's also a serious thing. It's a rejection of the real king. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to tuck into a bounty in front of you. A year ago at Christmas time, The children here at Emmanuel City Centre made crowns. I think maybe exactly this crown or one like it. They made crowns like this, and it's great. It's a great idea, I thought, because it's remembering that Jesus came, the one who was born King of the Jews. But what happens when you give a child a crown? Okay, what happens when you give a child a crown? Okay, goes on their heads, and they start ordering you around. Okay, they start ordering you around. They start being the one to be in control. And although we're trying to teach them that there is an ultimate king, this king, Jesus, they put it on their heads and they start ordering you around. And the Bible does teach that there is an ultimate king. There is a God who is good, who made this world good, who loves us, who loves his world too. And he wants us to enjoy it and find life and freedom in knowing him and living in his way. He made the whole thing. He made us, and he says it's good. Live in my way. I'm the king. Live under me. That's how you're going to get the most out of this life. It's going to be satisfying because you've got me. You're the one I need. You're the one you were made for. And yet what human beings have been doing since the very beginning, and you and I do it too, is we do this. We put the crown on our head. Not on his head, but on ours. And we say, no, I want to be in control. And that's exactly what the Bible calls sin. And we heard it a couple of times in those readings and the songs earlier. The Bible calls it sin, the act of rejecting his rule and putting the crown on our own head and saying, I'm going to do it my way. Rejecting what we were made for and rejecting who we were made for. And here's why the Christmas story is divisive. Here's why we see those different reactions, because it shows us that there is an ultimate king. There is a king who made this world and made us to live for him, and that it matters how we respond to him. And there's two ways to respond, isn't there? There's the King Herod way. I rule, king on my crown on my own head. Even if we kind of do that by just shrugging our shoulders and getting on with life, we're effectively putting that crown on our head and doing it my way. But there is another way. There is another way that doesn't say I rule, but says he rules. The crown is on his head. See the reaction of the Magi here, the other great reaction in our story. They're outsiders. They travel all the way from the east because they've seen this star. They're desperate to search out this baby King Jesus. And after seeing Herod, having that conversation with him, they follow that star until it stops over the house. And what's their reaction? They are overjoyed. Here he is. Here's the king. Overjoyed. In fact, as Steve read that word, I've never thought about being overjoyed in the same way there as joy, but it's like over the top, overjoyed. How can you even be overjoyed? But that's exactly what they are. A stark contrast with the disturbed feeling of Herod, the fear, keep control, got to keep control, got to do it my way. And we get this bizarre scene here in verse 11, when on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Here is a picture here of perhaps maybe what it looked like. Maybe it looked nothing like it, but it's trying to help us get this idea of influential, powerful, impressive men, these scholarly astrologers from the East. They've come in, we call them wise men and kings, because that's what they were like, and they bow down. They bow down on the floor in front of this baby. It's a bizarre scene. Maybe you can imagine Jesus in his mother's arms, kind of just giving them that sort of quizzical look that babies seem to be able to do when they're just going, what's going on here? There's all this fuss around me. What's going on here? What's happening? But the Magi know the significance of this moment of this baby. And so they pour out their hearts. They pour out everything in front of them. We read, they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I won't be giving any children gold, frankincense, and myrrh this Christmas. They'd be definitely more bothered about the wrapping paper or something else there. It's not the sort of present that you give a baby. I wonder what the baby Jesus how he actually responded to these gifts, because he was a real human baby. God, but made man. But these gifts are exactly the right ones for him, because they're fit for a king. Why is it that these Magi bow down and worship with joy in their heart? Because this is no ordinary baby, but this is God himself in human form, the one who's in control of the whole thing, who made it all, who is the ultimate king, stepping down into this world in the body of a human being, Jesus, the Son of God. The Creator comes down as part of his creation. See, here is the wonder of the Christmas story. It's not in the twinkly lights or the familiarity of songs and other things and the mulled wine and mince pies. It's not in that. The magic of the Christmas story is in the God of the universe coming to live among his people in the shape of a baby. And in this divided and broken world, there is someone who is bigger than the most powerful rulers on this planet, who's bigger than the Putins, the Bidens, the Xis. There is one who is bigger and who cared enough for you and for me that he stepped down into the mess of this world. And as the Magi look at him, they know that this is one so great they need to humble themselves and give everything they've got. And yet the big question is why? Why did God do it? Was it to give us a nice story to enjoy at Christmas time? Or was it greater? Well, remember what our reading before that Kira read for us. And we read these words as an angel appears to Joseph. The angel says, she, Mary, will give birth to a son, and you're to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. So we see that the Magi search for the King of the Jews. And there's one other time in Matthew's account of Jesus' life where Jesus is referred to as the King of the Jews. And that's in the moment he died, hung on a cross, a sign mockingly put under him, the King of the Jews, as if this guy being crucified, could he really be the King of the Jews? And yet there's an ironic truth. You see, Jesus grew up. He lived the most amazing life, teaching, loving, challenging, healing. You can read more about it in an account of his life. There's little booklets right by the front door if you want to grab one of those. But it ended as he's sentenced to death on a cross as the one who, because of his claim to authority, and it looked like failure, but that is the very act that brings freedom and forgiveness. And in that moment, he takes on himself the sins of the world, the way we all put our hands up and go, I rule, I rule. He takes it on himself so that you and I can truly know freedom and satisfaction in being restored to the relationship that we were made for. So Christmas can be a divisive time, and as you argue over the sprouts and whether someone's ever going to eat those bounties in the bottom of the tub before you can open another one, what will you make of the most divisive thing at all? Which way will you fall on Jesus? Will you be like Herod, I rule? Or will you be like the Magi, he rules? And come to him, the one true King, Jesus. So will you join with him? We'll join with them and worship the King this Christmas.
And I've just got a few questions. Thank you very much for those who sent them in. And yeah, just more of a comment, but I'm sure it will provoke an answer. Somebody says, I rule and I'm getting on fine. You haven't convinced me Jesus has anything to offer me. Do you want to respond to that comment?
I think there's quite a few things to say to that, I think. The first would be, in some ways, it's good to know life's going well for you. That's a good thing to treasure and enjoy. I mean, you'd be a very unusual person if that's the case for the whole of your life. And here's the promise that there is someone who is king over more than the circumstances that you find yourself in, and more than the best circumstances, but he's king over the worst circumstances as well. And so if that's how you find yourself now, then it's great that things are going well, but he's the king who's there when they're not, and that he's bigger than that. I suppose the second thing to say would be with that there is also a problem with being someone who is pushing aside the ultimate king, that actually there's a brokenness there. It's what the Bible calls sin. There's a rift. You're not right with the God that you were made to know. And it's something that God takes seriously. And the Bible speaks about that actually it comes a point where you'll be away from him forever, away from all his goodness. And so I think there's that wrapped up in there as well. And the claim is to be the ultimate king over all of that.
Thanks, Mike. As somebody writes, I think sort of tying in with that, why does everything in us push back against Jesus' rule?
That's a great question. I mean, we see it's the pattern all the way through the Bible. It said that human beings are like that from the very first moment that human beings turned away from God's rule initially. We see that right in the Bible book of Genesis, the first few chapters of the Bible. And there seems to be this impulse that we're kind of caught up with that first turning away from God that went on there, that's kind of what we're like. And it is that sense of wanting things to be our way. And I think one of the big things behind that is probably not trusting that his rule is really good for us. And the Bible says again and again, shows people time and time again that when they get that God's rule is good for them, and they do their best to follow, and they still maybe keep going, living an I-rule way, but actually that is when life is how it was meant to be. And I think that's probably the experience of Christians all over the place who keep turning back to I-rule, they keep feeling that impulse in their heart, but knowing that when their head turns to he rules, that's actually when life is as it's meant to be.
And last question, just because which has also got another person's vote. What would it look like to worship King Jesus this Christmas?
Well, we see the Magi giving these gifts, don't we? We're saying them give the riches that they bring, and they give them over to this baby Jesus. And I don't know if there's any more they could have given him than that. But I think what worshipping the King looks like is the giving over of our whole hearts to him, that he is that we give over all that we have, because all that we have is from him. But actually the affections of our hearts are turned primarily to him in praise, in thanking him, in as we enjoy all the good things that he's given us in this life. Not just enjoying them for the thing that they are, but enjoying them for the thing because of the one who gave them to us. And I think that's a whole attitude of our heart, which is worship. It doesn't mean we're going to stand up singing carols from now until the end of Christmas. It does mean, though, giving him our wholehearted affection and directing our hearts to him, praising for all those things that he's given us.
Thanks, Mike.